Welcome to a world with limitless possibilities. A world where pain and suffering are matched only by the sounds of those who endure it. Welcome to your nightmare.
Welcome to your nightmare.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Nightmare. Tonight, we're opening a door that should have stayed locked. We've all seen them sitting in the back of an attic or at a garage sale for $5. Cheap cardboard, a plastic pointer, a parlor game for teenagers. But there's a reason old rules exist. And there's a reason you never leave the board without saying goodbye. Turn out the lights, pull the covers up, and lock the doors. And welcome to tonight's nightmare. The box didn't look evil. It looked like something you'd find at the bottom of a closet in a house that smelled of stale menthol cigarettes and damp carpets. It was a standard Parker Brothers Ouija board, mid-1970s edition. The cardboard box was crushed at one corner, held together by a strip of yellowed Scotch tape. I bought it at an estate sale for $4. The old woman running the sale, a woman with thick bifocals and hands stained dark with soil, didn't even want the money. She just slid the box across the folding table and said, "Don't leave it in the house when you're done." I laughed then. Of course I did. I'm 32 years old, an audio engineer, and a deep cynic about the paranormal. I run a podcast where I debunk local legends and test urban myths. A Ouija board isolation challenge felt like easy content. One guy, one board, 3 in the morning, and a house miles away from the nearest streetlight. My living room was long and narrow, with old pine floorboards that creaked whenever the temperature dropped. I cleared the coffee table, wiped down the dust, and laid the board flat in the center. The planchette was light, made of cheap plastic with a clear glass lens in the center. It felt smooth under my thumb, almost greasy. I set up 2 cameras, a main DSLR angled over my shoulder, and a small infrared camera to capture my face. For audio, I used a high-sensitivity condenser microphone, the kind that can pick up a mouse moving inside your drywall. At 2:50 a.m., I turned off all the lights. The room went thick and black, save for the red recording lights and 2 low candles I'd lit beside the board. The flames didn't flicker. The air was cold and heavy. I sat on the floor and rested the tips of my fingers lightly on the planchette. "It is 2:58 a.m., I said in my clean narration voice. "We are testing the idiometer effect using a 1974 talking board. I am alone in the house. The doors are deadbolted." I looked down at the board. The printed letters, A through Z, gleamed dully under old varnish. "If anyone is here, speak to me," I said. Silence. The house made its usual noises, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of the oil furnace in the basement. "Are there any spirits present?" I asked again. "Move the board." Nothing. I smiled toward the infrared camera. As expected, without unconscious muscular movement, the planchette remained stationary. The idiometer effect requires. The planchette twitched. It wasn't a smooth glide. It was a sharp, violent jerk, like a fish snapping at a hook. It moved a quarter of an inch to the left, then stopped. My fingers slipped off the plastic. My heart did a sudden, hard flutter against my ribs. "Okay," I said, laughing softly, though my voice sounded thinner now. Settling wood or the heat from the candles expanding the plastic. I placed my fingers back on the board. I held them so lightly my fingernails barely grazed the surface. "Did I do that?" I asked the dark. "Or are you doing that?" The planchette didn't slide. It began to vibrate. It was a low, high-frequency tremor, the kind you feel in your teeth when a heavy truck idles outside your window. The glass lens in the center rattled against its housing with a sound like clicking teeth. Click, click, click. Then, with a deliberate, heavy grace, the planchette moved. It glided with a sickening, liquid smoothness, as if the varnish on the board had turned to wet oil. It went straight to the top left corner. Yes, it hit the folded cardboard seam of the board with a sharp thwack. I pulled my hand back. Jesus! I breathed. I looked at the camera monitor. My face looked washed out, eyes wide and dark. The planchette moved to yes, I told the microphone, forcing a steady voice. The movement was rapid, unassisted. Why are you lying? A voice inside my head whispered. You didn't touch it. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and sat back up. Who are you? I asked the empty room. I put 2 fingers back on the plastic. Immediately, the planchette took off. It swept across the board in wide, desperate figure eights, scraping against the cardboard. M-A-R-K-U-S. Marcus, I said, cold adrenaline dumping into my bloodstream. Did you die here? The planchette swept up to yes. How? The planchette didn't go to the letters. It began to trace the border of the board, round and round, faster and faster until the plastic was whistling against the paper. Marcus, slow down, I said. It stopped dead center. The candle on the left flickered and collapsed down to a tiny blue pinprick of light, stretching shadows across the room. From the condenser microphone sitting 2 feet away came a sound. I heard it in the physical air, a wet, heavy intake of air. It came from the dark corner behind my left shoulder, where the basement door sat, locked. I spun around. The beam of my recording light cut through the dark, showing nothing but the white painted wood of the door and the brass deadbolt sitting firmly in its keeper. Who's there? I called out. My voice broke. Nothing answered except the furnace, which cut off with a loud metallic clunk. The house went dead quiet. When I turned back to the table, the planchette was moving again. It hovered over the numbers at the bottom. 3 a.m. NOWISOPEN. 3 a.m. is now open. What is open, Marcus? The planchette slowly slid to the bottom of the board, stopping on goodbye. Then it pushed past the border, slid off the edge of the board entirely, and fell to the rug with a dull thud. The second candle vanished into darkness. The room plunged into absolute pitch-black night. I sat in the dark, unable to breathe. The air in the living room dropped so fast that when I opened my mouth, a plum of gray vapor spilled out. I reached into my pocket for my phone. The screen flashed bright white, showing 1% battery before turning green and dying completely. Great, I muttered. I reached blindly across the coffee table until my hand found the aluminum flashlight. I clicked the switch. A thick yellow beam cut through the dark. I shone the light at the floor. The planchette was lying on its back. The clear glass lens in the center was shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, as if a spike had been driven through it. The sound came from the hallway, a sharp wooden sound, like a heavy door being slammed shut. I stood up slowly, knees popping in the cold. I held the flashlight in my right hand, the beam shaking as I swept it toward the living room archway. Hello? Is someone in the house? I called out. No answer. I stepped into the short hallway. The bathroom door was on the left, my bedroom at the end, and the guest room on the right. All 3 doors had been shut. Now the guest room door was open 4 inches. I focused the light on the gap. "I have a phone," I lied. "The police are on their way." Something moved behind the gap. It was a slow, dragging motion near the floor. Then the smell hit me. It didn't smell like rot. It smelled like stagnant pond water and copper, the heavy metallic stench of fresh blood mixed with rust. It filled my nose so fast I gagged.
"Not Marcus,"
a voice scraped out from inside the guest room. It sounded like 2 pieces of dry sandpaper being dragged across each other. The door swung fully open. The beam of my flashlight hit the door frame. There was no one standing there. I lowered the light toward the floor, and my breath caught in my throat. Lying on the carpet, tucked in the corner, was a shape. It was a thick, wet mass that looked like a folded-up human body, but all wrong. The limbs were tucked under the torso at unnatural angles. The elbows pointed forward, the knees bent backward. It was covered in something gray and matted, soaked cloth that clung to its skin like wet paper. Its head was upside down. It rested its jaw on the carpet, its neck twisted 180 degrees, looking at me with 2 pale, milky eyes that had no pupils. Its mouth was split wide, stretched far beyond what human skin should allow, revealing 2 rows of black, broken teeth. It wasn't breathing. It was just staring. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead pipes filled with ice.
"The board,"
the voice scraped out from deep inside its throat.
"It's a door."
What do you want?" I choked out, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly in my grip. The thing's right arm, long, thin, and gray, unfolded from beneath its chest. The fingers were 6 inches long, ending in black, splintered bone where the nails should have been. It reached out, fingers dragging through the carpet with a dry shh sound. It pointed at my feet. I looked down. I had stepped on the broken planchette. The sharp pieces of glass were sticking out from the side of my boot, smeared with a thin black grease that had leaked from beneath the floorboards.
"You didn't say goodbye,"
the thing whispered. The joints in its spine popped, a sound like green branches snapping. As it lifted its chest off the floor, it began to crawl towards me on all 4s, the backward knees dragging along the carpet in a fast, spider-like jerkiness. I screamed, throwing the heavy flashlight straight at its face. The aluminum body hit the thing right between its milky eyes with a solid clang. It didn't flinch. The flashlight tumbled onto the carpet, its beam spinning wildly across the ceiling. The creature didn't slow down. I turned and bolted for the front door. I slammed my body against the heavy front door, my hands scrambling blindly for the brass deadbolt. Come on, I sobbed, twisting the latch. It was stuck. The metal felt frozen, fused into the strike plate, as if welded shut. I jammed my fingernails into the seam, pulling until the skin tore. Behind me from the hallway came the sound. I spun around, my back pressed flat against the door. The flashlight was lying sideways on the rug, throwing a narrow beam across the floor. The creature was on the coffee table. It was crouched on top of the Ouija board, its long, jointless fingers wrapped around the cardboard edges. Its upside-down head was tilted toward the ceiling, its black mouth widening further until the skin around its cheeks split. A thick, dark fluid smelling of ancient river mud, spilled out of its throat, pouring over the printed letters. A, B, C.
You called.
The thing hissed. The sound wasn't coming from the room anymore. It was coming from inside my own skull.
Now you listen.
The living room window shattered. It didn't burst inward from a rock. The glass simply imploded into a million sparkling diamonds. No wind came through the frame. Where the yard should have been, there was only a wall of dense, oily blackness. A shadow moved in the frame, another shape, long and thin, dragging itself over the sill. Then another. Near the kitchen, the floorboards began to warp. The old pine planks groaned as long, gray fingers forced their way up through the seams, searching the air like blind worms. They were coming from the crawl space. They were coming from the walls. "Goodbye!" I screamed. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my brass Zippo lighter, and struck the wheel with my bleeding thumb. Sparks flew. "Goodbye!" I yelled. I threw the flame at the drapes hanging beside the broken window. The polyester fabric went up instantly. A wall of bright, roaring orange fire erupted up the wall, illuminating the room in a blinding glare. The creatures shrieked, a high, glass-shattering whistle that filled my head until my nose began to bleed. The thing on the table thrashed as the heat hit its slick, gray skin. The black tar pouring from its mouth caught fire, burning with a bright, green flame that smelled of ozone and scorched hair. The deadbolt on the front door clicked. The heat of the fire had expanded the metal frame, popping the bolt back into its housing with a sharp snap. I pulled the door open and threw myself out onto the front porch. I ran until my lungs burned, down the long gravel driveway and out onto the dark asphalt of the main road. I didn't stop until I saw flashing lights of a county sheriff's cruiser parked outside a gas station 2 miles down. I spent hours in the back of that cruiser, wrapped in a blanket, shaking violently. I told them it was an electrical fire. I told them an outlet sparked and the drapes caught. I didn't mention the board. I didn't mention the hands under the floor. By noon the next day, the house was a blackened, hollowed shell. The roof over the living room had collapsed inward, leaving a scorched pit open to the cold sky. The fire marshal let me walk through the ruin to see if anything could be salvaged. "Looks like it started in the east wall," the marshal said, poking a ruler into the charred remains. "Old wiring. You're lucky you got out of here when you did, son." "Yeah," I whispered. "Lucky." I stood over the spot where the coffee table had been. The table was gone, reduced to ash. The cameras were melted lumps of plastic, except for one thing. Sitting in the exact center of the scorched floorboards, completely untouched by the fire, was a small rectangular shape. The SD card from my main camera. The plastic casing was cold when I picked it up. It didn't have a speck of soot on it. It took me 3 days to buy a new laptop, sit down in a motel room, and insert the card into the reader. There was only one video file, titled file_001.mp4. The timestamp read 3 a.m. I clicked play. The screen showed the living room before the fire. The 2 candles were glowing. I was sitting on the floor, my fingers resting on the plastic planchette. I watched myself speak. I watched myself ask the questions. Then the video reached the part where the planchette was supposed to move. On the recording, the planchette didn't move at all. It sat completely still in the middle of the board. My fingers weren't on it. In the video, I was sitting 4 feet back from the table, my arms wrapped tightly around my chest, staring at the empty air in front of me. My mouth was moving, and I wasn't speaking in my own voice. On the audio track, there was only the sound of 2 pieces of dry sandpaper scraping together, layered over a wet, heavy gurgle. In the video, I leaned forward, my face inches from the lens, my eyes completely white as they reflected the candle flames. "The board is not a game," my recorded self rasped. "The board is a tongue, and now we are using yours." The video cut to static. I closed the laptop, packed my bag, and drove to the nearest bridge. I threw the computer into the 40 feet of moving river water. That was 6 months ago. I live in a new city now, on the 4th floor of a modern concrete building with fluorescent hallway lights that never turn off. I don't keep wooden furniture. I don't own candles. I sleep with 3 lamps on. And I'm never alone in a dark room. But sometimes, when the city goes quiet around 3 a.m., I hear it. Not in the hallway, not under the bed. I hear a soft, dry sound coming from the back of my own throat. When I close my eyes, my tongue begins to move in my mouth, tracing the shapes of letters I didn't choose to spell. That is all for tonight's episode. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me for this evening's tale and for the new comments that people share with us. If you have any story suggestions, as always, you can reach out to me at nightmarepod@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And until next time, sleep well.